Hi, I'm Judy. I'm the developer of manifestation therapy. I am a manifestation coach and a trauma therapist, and I'm very passionate about trauma. I love to help people process, heal, and expand who are also trauma survivors. Now, one thing I'm going to say before we get into this is that this is about the third time I've attempted to do this podcast today. I also want to say that I do write a script, and that is so that I don't forget anything and so that I don't mess up my words like I often do. Okay, so trauma-informed, trauma-trained, and trauma-embodied. It's about knowing who to go to and how to heal and what really happens with a little bit of ADHD insight because that's who I am. So today, as I said, I'm going to talk about trauma, or more specifically, the treatment of trauma, as well as what it is and what to look for when you want to process or heal or just expand and grow so that you know if your trauma story may be playing against where you're trying to get, what to do. So before we dive in, let's make something really clear. This episode is not about hierarchy. It's not about saying one kind of practitioner is better than any other. Trauma-informed practitioners like yoga teachers, massage therapists, Reiki healers, your dentist, energy workers, teachers, coaches, psychotherapists. They are vital parts of the healing ecosystem. Not everybody is as passionate about trauma as I am. I've personally known many energy workers, massage therapists, osteopaths, coaches, teachers who were some of the most trauma-embodied, intuitive, and skilled practitioners that I've ever met. I would send someone to these individuals for what they need that they offer without any hesitation. I've also known some that were trauma trained and trauma skilled. They might not have the clinical titles, but their nervous systems were steady, attuned, and deeply safe to be around. My primary concern stems from a growing pattern where individuals suffering from severe or complex trauma are seeking support without fully appreciating the specialized and nuanced nature of the required therapeutic interventions to get the healing that they need. They want support that will help them heal or grow, but they just don't know the differences in how people word things, what it is called in the psychotherapy or coaching world, or what to seek out and ask for. They see the word trauma and they think that means that person is going to know how to help them process. Trauma-informed care is sacred. It's where so many people first begin to remember what safety actually feels like, where the body can finally rest, soften, and start to trust again. But there's an important distinction that I want to explore today, one that really matters if you're trying to heal, integrate, and grow. Being trauma-informed, it means that you understand trauma. You know how it shows up in behaviors, in energy. You know what the nervous system patterns may be. And you know how to prevent reactivation or shame. Being trauma-trained, trauma-skilled, or trauma-embodied, it goes a little bit deeper. It means that you have learned how to safely guide someone through their trauma, not just hold space for it. You know there's a time and place for their activation. And you can navigate both through their mind and their body. You hold an energetic field and the psychological process. You don't just create the calm, you actually help integrate what's been fragmented. And that's the kind of work that I do. Bridging evidence-based therapy like somatic and nervous system repair and energetic alignment through manifestation therapy. Because real trauma healing, it doesn't happen in just one layer. Not only the mind, but also the body, our energy, our spirit. It happens where all of these meet, where there's a connection. Okay, so what is trauma really? Trauma isn't just an event. It's not just a car crash or getting abused one time. It's not just about your teacher yelling at you. It's what happens inside you when all of these things could happen, or layers of these things could happen. It's about when something overwhelms your ability to stay regulated and connected. Your body keeps the score, literally. The nervous system, Yeah, there's more than one, records the overwhelm that happens when there's a threat. So it records it as activation, and then it initiates a survival instinct of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. But this is where the threats are stored as trauma, and why they are not about the story of what's happening. It's about when the activated survival response doesn't complete. So it actually gets stored, not as a memory, but as attention, as hypervigilance, as exhaustion, as shame. The brain, body, spirit, it basically says to each other, we need to remember this and prevent it in the future to stay safe. In the brain, trauma actually changes everything. So the amygdala, this little almond-shaped part at the back that controls all your emotion, it detects a threat and prioritizes danger signals. So during trauma, it becomes hyperactive, meaning it fires more easily, more rapidly. And then over time, this can cause persistent threat sensitivity. So the brain interprets neutral cues like sounds or faces, sensations, as potential danger. Even the brain can interpret focus as a potential danger eventually. The emotions may surface in relation to one of the five senses and can activate survival instinctual responses. The threshold for danger lowers dramatically after trauma. It becomes conditioned to activate faster and send stronger alarm signals. The five senses are from your body, and that's how your body remembers things. The prefrontal cortex is the regulator. It's the meaning maker of trauma. It helps with executive functioning. It's your adult brain. It's your planning and logic, impulse control, speech and language, rational decision making. As I said, it's when we become adults, it's our impulse control, which develops after 25. But the bridge between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, it becomes temporarily weakened. So survival response for the body becomes prioritized. That is supposed to happen. That is how we survive. It's how instinct acts on us really fast. Otherwise, if there was something coming at you, you wouldn't duck because you'd be thinking, well, is it real or perceived, or what should I do? You just do. So the problem is with complex or repeated trauma activation, the prefrontal cortex can have less inhibitory control over emotional centers. Meaning, if the brain repeatedly floods with stress hormones of cortisol and adrenaline, it becomes less active and less efficient overall at communicating with our amygdala. So the signal to logic emotional responses to check for reliability, it doesn't quite travel as effectively. So sometimes emotions can surge more easily without being moderately or context logic. There's literally structural changes that happen in the brain with trauma. So studies have shown that there is prefrontal cortex volume reduction and decreased connectivity between it and the limbic regions. The amygdala is in the limbic region. So people can know that they are logically safe, but they may still feel out of control terror because the thinking brain cannot override the survival brain. And I hear this so much. People are like, rationally, I get it, but my emotions happen anyway, and I don't know why. It's actually how our brains work. It's how our body works when we're disconnected. So it doesn't mean that it's permanent. Nothing's ever permanent. Neuroplasticity, the ability for the brain to change, is actually lifelong. So they used to tell us that once you're a certain age, that's it, you're stuck with it. They even used to say that as a child turns 4, their personality is stuck. This isn't true at all. Neuroplasticity can change right to the day we're gone. Safety can be learned, just as it was learned that things were not safe. So let's talk about the vagus nerves, your body's safety brake. There's actually branches of this that moves throughout your body. One's called the ventral vagal complex, and that supports safety, connection, calm social engagement. And then the other is the dorsal vagal complex, which supports immobilization, shutdown, or freeze response. And yes, we do need both. With trauma, the vagal regulation becomes disrupted because the body learns in the time of threat that safety is not reliable. early chronic threats, especially condition the nervous system to default to defense states of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So the ventral vagal system of social engagement and co-regulation may become underused and weaken. The system cycles so rapidly between sympathetic arousal of fight and flight and the dorsal collapse of shutdown and numbness. And this creates an autonomic dysregulation. Not because something is broken, but because survival is being prioritized by the body. It's meant to happen. But it doesn't care if it's real or a perceived threat. The vagus nerve adapts to chronic threat by prioritizing defense instead of connection. And that's why trauma isn't just emotional. It changes how you think, it changes how you feel, how you trust yourself and others, and it changes how you manifest. It fragments your energy. It disconnects your mind from your body and your body from your intuition and your spirit from your sense of safety. There are many people who treat through vagus nerve hacks to heal the nervous system. And they do work momentarily, like cold plunges, sound. I love a sound bath, breath work. And these do work to stimulate the vagus nerve, as I've said, but that doesn't mean that they create automatic regulation. Real regulation actually comes from consistent, safe experiences with connection and presence, which includes co-regulation with others. So feeling seen, heard, attuned, supported, having that best friend. Slow, diaphragmatic breathing with awareness, like box breathing. Somatic therapy and trauma release, which you can get from brain spotting, EMDR, somatic experiencing, a bunch of others. And mindful movement, grounding, and gentle interception, like energy healing, Reiki, acupuncture, yoga. Healing needs to happen holistically, with relational safety, retraining the nervous system into trusting calm as a default, not as a threat itself. Even polyvagal theory is not a universal law. It's an interpretive model, and it helps explain trauma responses and connection states. It's useful as a therapeutic tool. It's not the only or final explanation of the vagal function. It can sometimes almost oversimplify automatic pathway. Still, its core idea holds true. Safety and connection are biological states, not mental decisions. Healing restores the vagal flexibility, not just the calm. Healthy vagal function means your system can mobilize when there's a real threat and then return to baseline when the threat's gone. And stay socially connected while alert. As trauma healing isn't about always being calm, it's about the range. It's not about all of a sudden nothing's ever going to bother you again. The ability to move through activation and return to safety with ease is resiliency. It's true resiliency, and it's what trauma healing aims to restore. The vagus nerve is not your enemy. It's actually your body's guardian. Trauma just taught it to guard too tightly. Healing teaches you to release again. So there are many, many, many diagnoses for trauma experiences. Let's go over some common ones. The diagnosis of trauma categories. It really depends on the type, the duration, and the developmental period when it occurs. So I usually say it's the threat to self, to another, or attachment trauma, which a lot of people don't like to talk about because they feel like it's blaming someone. But during your developmental stages, your needs were met through your caregivers. And if there was dysfunction or chaos or the threat of unmet needs that would signal to your brain and body that you may not survive, including co-regulation disruptions or attachment breaks and loss, then it would actually create these layers of threat in your brain. And it was no fault of whoever was caring for you. They were doing the best they could with what they had, which includes when they didn't do the best. The big diagnosis has always been PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorders. But put in simple terms, it includes symptoms like re-experiencing, avoidance, hyperarousal, negative mood, and cognition changes after actual or threatened harm. It's kind of like a go-to for diagnosis with trauma. Unfortunately, however, it's really more about one single event, not a series of events or developmental trauma, which happens in layers. Because those are imprints on you during your developmental stages, and it's way more complex than that. Which leads me to complex PTSD, which includes symptoms of PTSD plus persistent dysregulation of affect, self-conception, and interpersonal functioning, which means your relationships suffer. And why wouldn't they? Because it's all about connection to self, connection to the others. So I explained these as being an event that caused trauma versus layers of traumatic events. And then there's, of course, acute and adjustment disorders, which are PTSD-like symptoms that happened within the first 30 days after trauma exposure. So adjustment disorder is noted through emotional or behavioral symptoms that are in response to identifiable stressors that don't actually meet the PTSD criteria. Then there's, of course, dissociative disorders like DID, which is dissociative identity disorder. It used to be known as multiple personality disorder. There's dissociative amnesia, depersonalization, and derealization disorder, which, thanks TikTok, has been making a comeback with youths trying to say they have it. Although, just so you know, youth are going through a developmental lifespan stage where they don't know who they are, and they're trying to figure that out. So these will often emerge from chronic developmental or attachment trauma. There's also somatic symptoms and related disorders like somatic symptom disorder, functional neurological or conversion disorder, it's known as, and chronic pain disorders, which have often been linked to unresolved trauma, stress, or body memory. These disorders often are unexplained physical responses to emotional distress. Often it's those ones that you think they're faking it, but they're not. They just don't know what's going on with their body. The disconnect is that big. So there's, of course, also attachment and developmental trauma, which must be recognized as a trauma diagnosis. These can include reactive attachment disorder, RAD, disinhibited social engagement disorder, developmental trauma disorder, proposed not DSM official yet, even oppositional defiant disorder. These all affect children that have been exposed to chronic neglect or abuse. There's mood and anxiety spectrum disorders like major depressive disorder, which has a trauma-related subtype. There's generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, phobias, which are often secondary to trauma. And there's things like obsessive compulsive disorder, which has symptoms that an individual wants to control or attempts to control post-trauma. And let's not forget the personality and relational dysregulation, like borderline personality disorder. I used to specialize with that. Frequently, it's rooted in early attachment trauma. There's avoidant, dependent, or antisocial traits, histrionic personality disorder. There's even narcissistic personality disorder, schizophrenia, and schizoaffective disorders, which also have trauma links. And they come from complex survival adaptations. So, of course, there's also substance-related and behavioral addictions, which are known to often be trauma-driven coping. People look to substances or food or sex or work or control behaviors to cope through trauma or post-trauma. So I'm not even mentioning the many physical disorders which also have links to trauma, like fibromyalgia, for instance, or PCOS. But there's so many of them. Trauma releases neuropeptides in the brain and it stores in the body. So it's literally a brain-body connection with trauma and our health. There are people out there that are very highly known doctors, psychiatrists, whatever, that talk about how everything in your body can be a function of trauma or threat or your body's response to something. The disconnection. The point I'm going towards in this podcast, though, is the differences in how we look at trauma as a society and what you need to consider when you're treating, healing, or expanding with trauma in your background. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the spectrum of competence. Trauma-informed is about awareness, safety, sensitivity. A trauma-informed practitioner understands that trauma can show up anywhere. In behavior, in silence, in body posture, in resistance, and in tears. These people will focus on creating safety of choice and developing empowerment. They don't support you through processing your trauma. They protect the nervous system from reactivation. So this could be your yoga teacher letting you opt out of a pose that feels unsafe. It could be a massage therapist asking permission before they touch, or a coach letting you take a break when you feel overwhelmed. It could be a psychotherapist that focuses only on CBT and talk therapy. These people are essential. They are the safe places and spaces that make deeper work possible. This does not mean, however, that if you want to heal specifically from complex trauma that you have, that a trauma-informed practitioner is who you should go to for this specific purpose. These are the backbones to your healing, and they support your regulation and co-regulation. They can help you heal your body, learn to trust yourself and others, and release held energy from your body. They can guide you into what you need before, during, and after connecting with trauma-trained practitioner to support your trauma healing journey. Trauma-trained means the individual has the competency, the background, the training specific in a trauma or multiple trauma modalities. They didn't just read a book or take a masterclass. They have hours of experience, guidance, and here's a key, supervision. It's about skill, containment, and processing. A trauma-trained professional has learned how to help you move through trauma, not just avoid it or ground from it. So they're educated in trauma physiology, attachment, and nervous system repair. They can recognize activation in real time and use methods to help the body release and re-regulate. So this could include EMDR or somatic experiencing, brain spotting, which is my passion, internal family systems, which I integrate, or polyvagal informed therapy. Could be energy work, or it could be body work, meditation practices. There are so many others, like exposure therapy or trauma incident reduction or ACT. The point is that with a trauma-trained practitioner, you're in a stage where deep integration begins, where your story, your body, and the energy, they all start to align again. It's not about stopping your activation. It's about moving through it. A trauma-skilled or trauma-experienced practitioner is embodiment. This person doesn't just know trauma, they've lived through it, studied it, integrated it, and sought supervision for it. They've done their own work. Their present itself feels like regulation. So they can hold you in an intensity without collapsing or trying to fix you. There's never judgment because it isn't about them. And they don't take their work home when they finish. They are well grounded, their nervous system is at peace because they know yours may not be. So when you're with someone who is trauma skilled or trauma embodied, you actually feel your nervous system begin to settle without them having to say a word. Their state teaches your body what safety feels like again. It's really about their energy as well. If you have trauma, you go to an embodied, trauma-trained therapist or coach to heal and grow. This is where you do the deeper work. It's about integrating your fragmented parts. It's about processing the memory, restoring the regulation, and reclaiming your agency. But again, that doesn't mean other kinds of care don't matter. So if you have trauma, you also go to the trauma-informed practitioners, the body workers, the energy healers, the yoga teachers, the mentors who understand trauma sensitivity. the breathwork class where it's trauma-informed. You want to help your body experience safety again, and trauma-trained work helps you process, while trauma-informed care helps you restore. You actually need both because the nervous system doesn't heal only in the therapy room. It heals in how you live, how you breathe, and how you connect to both yourself and others. It isn't just about healing one area. I could never teach someone all the nutrients that they need in their body, although I can recommend a good naturopath that can, and maybe one or two supplements to research. I can't suggest yoga types or lead you through the poses, but a trauma-informed yoga instructor can and will do so without pushing. They will give you the choice. I can suggest you take care of your own body and that you move it, that you feel it, that you recognize it, that you love it. I cannot suggest who you go to for the practice of energy work, Reiki, healing, massage, osteopath, chiro, or even for sound baths and breath work. But I know that these many therapists out there that are trauma-informed, and some are even trauma-trained, and I would recommend them for this. I can support you through healing your mindset, making a shift into a healthier, happy version of yourself, and I can help you find your purpose or connect to yourself and others. Making the connection of mind, body, spirit, energy, and understanding that even with the therapy or coaching that we can do together, there's more on your journey and you may need to release, restore, or reconnect with. It's a journey, not a destination, as they say. Sometimes this might include encouraging a client to join a gym, and sometimes it's encouraging them to connect with a peer support group or an energy healer who can release what's held in their body, or go to Reiki or energy healing to unblock. Sometimes it's about encouraging a client of another culture to connect spiritually to where their roots are, or to a medium that maybe they can get the support they need to move through their grief with the connection to the other side. Sometimes it's about connecting them to a doctor for medication, or for a dietitian or a nurse practitioner for a diagnosis and assessment. Sometimes it's about going on an autoimmune specific diet and finding a specific someone to treat that, or an acupuncturist or a massage therapist to gain what the body work may be missing. As a trauma-trained worker, I don't hesitate to refer a client to an area that I myself am not trained and experienced in, if I intuitively or through their own communications see that there is a clear need for that. It's a red flag if you have a practitioner of any kind that doesn't want to refer you out. Okay, so let's talk about one of my favorite things, ADHD, because it does change the picture a little bit, even though I think of it as a superpower. People with ADHD live in a nervous system that's already wired for intensity. There's less dopamine, less regulation, and more sensitivity to emotion and rejection. So when trauma enters the system, it actually amplifies everything. Trauma further weakens the prefrontal cortex, the part that manages focus, motivation, and impulse control. So now you have two nervous systems stacked on top of each other. One that's fast, scattered, and overstimulated, and one that's protecting you from your pain. This is why ADHD and trauma often look similar. Forgetfulness can be disassociation. Overwhelm can be the freeze state. Impulsivity can be the fight response. And if you're both, you need a trauma-trained practitioner who understands how neurodivergent systems regulate differently. ADHD brains heal best through predictability and gentleness. They need short, frequent regulation practices, not long, intense processes. They need permission to rest and celebration of sensitivity, not shame around their inconsistency. So, this is why I did create manifestation therapy, because I saw that trauma healing was often missing something, either the body or the energy or the mindset or just the connection. And you can't heal if one of these three is left out. Manifestation therapy integrates the mind with the cognitive reprogramming and awareness through CBT and DBT tools, emotion with emotionally focused, the body through somatic and nervous system regulation with brain spotting and grounding, mindfulness, and energy through alignment, frequency, and the universal laws. Manifestation therapy does not forget spirit. It is purposeful, intuitive, higher connection that we have with self-worth and self-awareness. It's trauma-informed, it's also trauma-trained. And it's trauma-embodied because it works with the whole human. You can't manifest from survival. You can't create expansion from a dysregulated nervous system. You have to actually feel safe in order to receive. So this work isn't just about releasing your trauma, it's about remembering who you are underneath it. It's coming home. So there's integration, awareness, and skill in embodiment. Awareness is where safety begins. Skill is where transformation happens. Embodiment is where freedom lives. Awareness keeps people safe. Skill helps them process. And embodiment helps them lead and live differently. So healing isn't about never getting triggered again. It's about knowing how to return safely and faster each time. When your body trusts you, your life begins to open up again. Your nervous system becomes your manifestation channel, and your energy starts flowing forward instead of looping into survival. So if you have trauma, find people who meet you where you are. Go to trauma-informed spaces when you need gentleness. Go to trauma-trained practitioners when you're ready to process. And surround yourself with trauma-embodied people, those whose presence reminds your nervous system what safety and truth feel like, so that healing can happen, because it happens in a relationship. It happens with co-regulation. Regulation is contagious. And when your body feels safe, your spirit finally gets to lead again. That's where intuition develops. Okay, so thank you very much. I hope you like, follow, share. Don't forget to comment. If you comment with a yes, I will send you a list I'm developing on all the questions to ask a trauma-informed or trauma-trained professional to make sure that you are going to get your needs met. All right. Thank you.